Hello everybody, Robin Nichols here talking to you today all about resolution and canvas size and sharpening for print. Now resolution's a bit of a weird one because most people I deal with in face-to-face classes find it quite hard to understand what resolution's all about. It's essentially the number of pixels that you have in the image. It's almost like the number of dots that you have in the image. The more dots you have, the finer the resolution or the finer the quality and the sharper and clearer the picture looks. That's almost not an issue these days because most of us have cameras with 12, 14, 16, 20 megapixel or 20 million pixel resolutions. Resolution also refers to the resolving power of the lens. So you have to say the lens quality, i.e. the glass, is also very important. So you can have 20 million pixels, but if it's using a sort of cheap plastic lens that's been badly manufactured in, I don't know, wherever, it's not going to produce the same kind of clarity and enlargeability that a 10 million pixel lens will produce, sorry, 10 million pixel camera with a lens that's maybe manufactured in the old East Germany, like a Carl Zeiss lens, for example, which will resolve far better detail and contrast and give you a clearer, sharper result, even though it's half the number of pixels. So I'm looking at my picture here and I'm thinking, well, this is a 63.3 million pixel image. How do I know that? Well, it says 63.3 down on the bottom here. If we click on the little tab here, and I'll just move this window up the screen so you can see what we're looking at, and I'll minimize the organizer here. So we can see document size, document profile, etc., etc. This is the color profile. This is actually the physical dimensions that you will get it to print at 240 pixels per inch, if that's the right setting, and so on and so forth. So there's a number of other things here, but typically we want to have document size set. So I know that this is a full resolution file because I know my Canon 5D Mark III produces a file that's 63.3 megabytes. So I know I haven't cropped it or edited it and reduced its size. What we're going to look at is two things. It's simply the image size and the canvas size dialog boxes. Both of them, I think, beginners find extremely complicated. There's that figure again, 63.3. Good, we're on to something. It's 240 pixels per inch. That is the same as 240 dots per inch or lines per inch in the printing press parlance. So it doesn't really matter what pixel per inch it is. It's just a random number that has been set in the factory in Japan when you buy the camera, when they design the camera. If we want, I can change this to 300 pixels or dots per inch, and that's generally the way we do it in the printing industry, because in order to print a picture that doesn't look as though it's pixelated, i.e. it looks like it's a continuous tone photograph, we need around about 300 pixels or dots per inch. I have to say that most printers are so good these days, you can print at 240 or even 200 dots per inch and it still looks fantastic. When you get down to about 70 or 60 or 50 dots per inch, then the picture begins to look a bit soft. But what inkjet printers do, for example, is they do dithering, and what that does is they actually spray extra ink to soften the lack of pixels, and essentially they're adding pixels. The main point there is you never actually see pixels in the image. It's still filled with ink, but that ink gives a slightly softer feel, but it's still an amazing result even at low resolutions. So why am I showing you the image size box? Well, if we want to, I can actually resample the image, and resample means I can add more or subtract from here. So let's say I want to make this picture smaller because I'm not going to print it 60 centimeters wide. Let's say I want to print it 30 centimeters wide. So I'm just going to type in 30. So with the resample image box checked, 30 centimeters wide, and I'm constraining the proportions so it actually goes to 30 by 20, which is the normal shape of the picture, it goes from 63 down to 15 million pixels, so approximately half the resolution, as you'd expect, because it's approximately half the size. Let's say we'll bring it down to 12 centimeters, and then it goes down to 2.45 megabytes. The reason we do this is very simple. If you're going to print 20 pictures at 12 centimeters by 8 centimeters, it's going to be far faster to print 2.45 million pixels at a time rather than 63 million. I'll click OK, bang, the picture shrinks down. I can zoom in and it still looks fantastic. It's only when I zoom in too far, and I've just gone too far, that you begin to see the pixels, and you can see the jaggies around the figure here, and that means there's not enough pixels. But if we view the picture at the size that I set, okay, which is about there, it actually looks photographic. I don't see any jaggies at all. I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo that. So image size is kind of useful. Here we go, image size. Now if I want to just change the pixels per inch and set it to 300 without adding or subtracting any pixels, I just uncheck resample image, highlight that and put in 300. And it now says, look, it's actually going to print a little bit smaller because I'm pushing those pixels slightly closer together. There is no advantage on me thinking, well, I'm just going to get a better quality. I'm going to make it 600 pixels, in which case I'm going to only print it 24 by 16 centimeters. There's no advantage in doing that because most printers, inkjet, commercial printers, lithographic printers, don't really benefit from having any more than 300 dots per inch. All you're doing is just adding, you're just piling up the pixels, and you don't see any visual benefit. You don't see any better clarity or more detail in the shadows. So let's put that back to 300. The trick with this tool, though, is to remember to have the resample image checked or unchecked, depending on whether you want to add or subtract pixels here. In this case, I didn't want to actually add or subtract any pixels at all, so I unchecked them, changed it to 300, then I've checked them again. You'll note down at the bottom there are a number of different ways of making that reduction or increase in pixels happen. We have, it's called bicubic resampling, and we have bicubic, smoother and sharper, obviously for enlargement or for reduction, as it says here. Nearest neighbor is one that I use quite a lot when I want to increase or decrease a graphic. And a graphic could just be a screen grab, i.e. a photo of the screen, and all I want to do is make, for example, the image size box that we see on the screen here bigger or smaller in order to put it into an illustration. So by nearest neighbor works quite nicely on graphics. It just makes an absolute dog's breakfast out of real photos, so never try it on real photos. Bicubic is always the best. Bilinear is also one that I don't use ever because it doesn't really apply very well to photographs. Stick with bicubic, or as I say, nearest neighbor if you're going to use graphics. Okay, so that's the image size dialog box. What about this canvas size business? I'm just going to go back here and resize. Let's just resize this image, make it a little bit smaller. So we're going to resize it. Let's say my client says, yep, let's go 10 by 8 inches. Right. Okay, so I'm going to resample. I'm going to say, let's go down to reduce it. Let's change it to inches, and it's going to be 10 inches. Didn't I say 10 inches? Right. 10 inches, not 18 inches, Robin. There you go. So I can't do 10 by 8 because proportionally it's going to go 10 by 6.6. So I think, oh well, I'm going to live with that. Click OK. It reduces in size, and that's now 11 million pixels. That's pretty good though. Still going to be pretty good quality until I get to about that size. Yep, then it goes jaggy because I've just enlarged it bigger than 10 inches across the screen, and it's going to go, hey, we haven't got enough pixels in this, so we're going to have to do a little bit of a software sort of shortcut. And you see here when I zoom in, look out, we're missing some pixels, and that's where it goes pixelated or jaggy, just not enough pixels in the image. Okay, so providing you don't go bigger than the one that you've already chosen, i.e. 10 inches, it's going to look beautiful. Now, canvas size. What the heck is canvas size? I describe this rather like a straight picture. This is a 10 by 6 picture. It has a backing paper on it, which is 10 by 6.6 inches. Well, you don't see it because it's exactly the same size. But if we go to the resize canvas size department, here we get something that looks, I think when I first started with Photoshop Elements, I thought, wow, this looks a bit scary. What's this? And it says it's 10 by 6.6 inches. Okay, so everything checks out there. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to add 1 inch to the back side of this picture, 1 inch to the canvas. Okay, and the easy way to do that is to click on the relative button, because then I just need to click on width and say 1 inch, height 1 inch. Make sure that the canvas extension color is actually white so I can see it. Click OK. Bidding! Wow, without the sound effect, that's pretty good. Let me do that again. Image, resize, canvas size. Okay, and I always check relative like that, so because I find it 25, and if I want to add 1.5, I've got to think that 1.5 to 25.4. It saves me the mental arithmetic because I'm lazy or I'm not very good at math. Now, one little trick I can show you with Adobe products, and this works in Premiere Pro, Premiere Elements, Adobe Photoshop Elements, and a number of other Adobe applications, is rather than sort of going click, dragging with the mouse to highlight that, simply do this. Click on the word height, click on the word width, and it just automatically selects that number and highlights it. So that saves you a bit of trouble. But wait, there is more. I can click, as you can see, a little finger appears with a arrow pointing left and right. If I then click and drag it to the right or to the left, I can add or subtract. How cool is that? And these are called scrubby sliders. I'm just going to make this a little bit easier. Put it into inches, and I'm literally going to drag it up. In this case, it's going to be really difficult because it's not going to allow me just to do one, so I might just hit it and type in 1. But scrubby sliders, very, very handy because they allow you to very quickly get at measurements, and that applies to a lot of functions, not only in the image size or the canvas size, but in layer palettes and a whole range of other things. Anyway, let's stand back and watch what happens. There we go. So there's my white border. What have we done to the picture though? We've actually added pixels. Okay, so although you can never look underneath this, and you can see here in the layer palette in the upper right hand corner, it's still one layer. It's not as if I've slid a large sheet of white paper underneath. It's basically just extended the photo but using white pixels rather than photographic pixels. What I do is just going to repeat that. I'm going to go resize canvas size, and this time I'm going to choose black, and instead of centimeters I'm going to choose inches. I'm going to choose millimeters, and I'm going to put in 2 millimeters, 2 millimeters, click OK. So we get a very thin black line. Wow. Okay, let's try that again. We'll go canvas size, and it's a little bit tedious because you have to kind of repeat after me all the time, and we're going to choose not black, we're going to choose white this time, and I'm going to hit on there, and we're going to go 3 centimeters, and let's go 3 centimeters there, and click OK. Okay, shrink it down in size. You can see where I'm coming from. But again, we're now up to 18 million. So we're not shrinking the picture down, we're actually increasing the size of the picture by adding pictures as extra real estate to the left, to the right, to the top and the bottom. One more time, and we can see here image, resize, canvas size. Now this thing down here, this is a little direction finder. So let's say I want to add, don't want to add any more to the width, but I want to add a little bit to the height. If I just type in, say 1, it's going to add half a centimeter to the top and bottom. But if I click like that, it's just going to add all the real estate that I've typed in, which is 1 centimeter, down to the bottom. It's just sends it all south. Click there, bingo. So that's what that little gizmo works. A very nice little feature. Canvas size, very, very important. And as you can see here, we can use canvas size not only to make the canvas bigger, but we can use it to make borders. Okay, moving on. When we're going to prepare a picture for print, and let's say this is now going to be printed, the final stage, I guess, of the editing cycle or workflow is to add some sharpening. And sharpening is available either in the raw processing window, which we looked at in the 3rd video in week 1, or we can use the sharpen tools that are under the enhance menu in this particular window. Down at the bottom you can see unsharp mask and or adjust sharpness. We'll deal with unsharp mask. That's a very unfortunate framing. Here's this geyser. As you can see, it's actually quite a noisy picture. It's quite a noisy picture, and for some reason 348% was what I had set previously. That's quite a lot. But you can see here, if I bring this up here, if I click and hold, that turns the sharpening off. If I let go with the mouse or the cursor in this little square window, it puts it back on. So you can preview on and off. And again, you can see if I'm cranking this up to say 200%, that's kind of heavy, and you'll find that the background, for example, does get a bit noisy. I can soften that down a little bit by using the threshold slider. As you can see, that really softens it down quite nicely. So it maintains sharp lines along the lines of different contrasts, especially around the edges and the creases in the fat, and the separation between foreground and background objects. And that's what unsharp masking is about. It's about adding contrast using a mask, which happens in the background. We don't actually see it happening. Threshold allows me to smooth out the midtones or the tones in between those contrast masks. So even though the line along the arm, for example, here still remains quite contrasty, I've smoothed out some of the noise in between those lines using threshold. Radius allows me simply to spread the search for contrast wider than just a cut line along the edge here. And you can see here you have to be a little bit careful, because if you have too much radius, what will happen is you end up by getting a halo, and you can see along this guy's arm there's a bit of a funny coloured halo. So I can pull this back to about 0.9 or something like that. That dials it down a little bit. So essentially sharpening is just finding a balance between not too much and just enough, or not enough. Alright, and I'd probably take, yep, I definitely need some threshold in there. Of course, if I'd processed this correctly, I would have reduced the noise at the original raw file processing stage rather than trying to soften it down, because any kind of softening, of course, in this process is going to be detrimental to the image quality. Alright, I'm going to cancel that and just move on very briefly to show you the second one. This is called adjust sharpness, and this is just a little bit easier to use. Now all we have to do here is apply an amount of sharpening. As you can see, I have the same problem here. I get a little bit of dottiness happening here. I've got a radius that allows me to go up to a massive amount, and I get kind of a very cool but unwanted special effect happening here, so I don't want that. So I want to keep the pixel radius, how far it looks for contrast, down to a minimum of around, I don't know, 8 or 1 or something like that. But to remove some of the problems, I can use, I don't know, something like lens blur, and you can see here it actually softens the amount of noise that we see, and that's quite good. Lens blur is particularly good, and we can change the direction that the motion blur. Lens blur doesn't work nearly so much in this case. Gaussian blur is even worse. So in this case, motion blur is probably the best. You can see here that more refined has a little bit of an impact on it. Yes, it certainly does. And I can increase the amount maybe. Yep, so now I've gone way too much. So clearly I can go too far, and frequently do, just to make this a little bit harder. It's going to be a tricky one to fix actually, because there is actually quite a lot. If I remember rightly, this was 3200 ISO and slightly underexposed, so it has exemplified. Now here's that radius happening around this man's shoulder here. You can see there's a bit of a glow. If we pull this down to 0.6, that glow disappears. And you'll see this in the press, for example, a lot of the time where people are very quick, they're very fast about sharpening something ready for press, they over sharpen, and you'll see sometimes people have halos around them like this, where too much sharpening has been applied. Okay, very simply, that's how we work with that. So canvas size is fantastic for adding borders. Image size is fantastic for reducing or increasing the size of pictures using that process called resampling. And of course, as the final function before we press the print button, we apply some sharpening, either using adjust sharpness or better still, the unsharp mask. Now, a final tip, never sharpen a picture more than once, because if you do it twice, it just makes everything go completely pear-shaped. The noise increases exponentially. It just looks horrible. So sharpen once, save it, and then print it.